Sadat, thank you for coming here.
Nice room.
Sadat, it's time we conclude our business.
What do you mean?
What do you think I mean? You owe me this money.
250 grand, what for?
Sit down, my friend. On a line? All right. It's your choice. Now, the business. When do I get my money?
What money, Nick?
You want cognac? Make you feel better.
I want my fucking money!
You want to leave this room alive? You pay me.
I'll give you 20,000 now and I'll get you the rest later.
You take this piece of shit to the bank and get me $20,000.
Nick, look at me. I look like the Elephant Man. The bank's not gonna serve me.
Now, little man, fill this form and I get the hotel to do the exchange. Good man. Now, you have 1 week to give me the rest of the money, understand?
No! 1 week, little man! Understand?
Meet Nikolai Radev, cold-hearted killer, extortionist, drug dealer, torturer, and identity thief. Tonight we uncover the facts behind the fiction and examine the life of Nikolai Radev, the Invader. Radev was a notorious gangster who ran amok on the streets of Melbourne, killing and torturing his way to the top of organised crime. Radev's reign of fear lasted 2 decades, and his modus operandi was to invade and destroy his victims' lives. Tonight, through dramatised scenes, expert analysis and first-hand accounts, we examine what motivated this ultra-violent and unrepentant killer.
Nick Radev was a criminal all-rounder. He'd get involved in anything.
I want my fucking money!
His propensity for violence would have to rate him right at the very top.
He'd threatened to hurt your family, he'd threatened to hurt old people, he'd threatened to hurt children.
He was a desperate, vicious criminal, and he made a lot of enemies very fast.
Are you going to kill me? Are you going to kill me?
Radev was obviously a bloke who was very comfortable with violence against other people.
Nick was an extortionist, so his primary tool was fear.
He was a lethal weapon and a menace to society.
Radev arrived in Australia in 1980 and rapidly established himself as a feared player in Melbourne's underworld. Although he racked up convictions for violence and trafficking, Radev avoided sustained police attention and he mostly preyed on other criminals. He didn't play by the underworld's rules. He attacked his victims' families. He tortured people and even challenged the police and won. Radev was a man who literally got away with murder.
Look, he ran pretty much the broad gamut of the old toe cutter type activity, where you'd find out who'd done an armed robbery and you'd go around and give them the Avon lady ring on the doorbell while they're sitting there counting out the money and take more than your fair share, and if they didn't, they'd suffer the consequences.
Radev is running this network of dealers. It's not his only enterprise, it's just one of them. It's particularly lucrative, and Radev was always assured that he would be paid, because he was an extremely violent man. People were fearful of him.
If Nick Radev picked a target, he would completely invade their lives. He would terrorise them, he would threaten them with death, put guns in their mouths, and he would bleed them dry.
In 1998, Les Papadopoulos was at his Northcote home when he says Nick Radev and 2 other men bound and gagged his parents, wife and 5-year-old daughter, then ransacked the house.
He went up to her, he stuck the gun on the temple, and he banded, he goes, the money or your daughter.
Radev, in my opinion, was highly underrated, both by the police and by a lot of the people he mixed with.
I mean, he was notorious. I mean, at one stage he actually kidnapped a university science student and made them cook speed for him.
One of the things that he rose to fame over, if you could call it fame, is Radev one evening went to the house of a man that had been selling drugs on his behalf. There's several $1,000s owed, and Radev at gunpoint made the man strip in front of his wife and family, and in front of his wife and children he sodomised this bloke.
Forensic psychologist Dr. Chris Lennings has studied the motivations of violent offenders like Radev.
That is just gross and terrifying humiliation of a really nasty kind, and it is so deliberate. He obviously knows exactly what he's doing, and he's not just humiliating the guy. What he's doing is actually destroying the family.
He not only inspired fear, but he also degraded these people. He's quite diverse and probably even perverse in his criminality. And we know as psychologists that's probably one of the highest risk factors for violence and psychopathy is that diversity.
By the late 90s, Radev had done time for armed robbery, blackmail and drug and firearms offences. An old prison hand, his experience gave him the advantage over terrified first-timers. Radev would groom his victims, gaining their trust before launching his attack. Turkish businessman Sedat Salan was unfortunate enough to be befriended by Radev and his sidekick, Sam Zayat, in prison.
In order to be able to bully, you need someone who in some way is vulnerable. And Sedat was vulnerable in prison.
He met Sedat Salan, who was an inferior, weak person in jail, and offered him protection. But in reply for that protection, Sedat had to arrange money to be paid to Nick Radev and his cohorts. Once he left prison, Sedat thought that that would all be over, that he's out, he's had his protection, but it didn't stop.
Hello?
Sedat, come, I need to see you urgently.
Sedat was asked to come to an address at Stamford Plaza in Melbourne.
One day you'll wind up in big trouble with that man.
I'll see you in the morning.
Journalist Peter Hoisted met with Sedat Salan, who told him the terrifying details of his ordeal.
The moment he arrives in the room, he's king hit, he's beaten. He has no idea what this is all about. Nick Radev is sitting imperially while a beating is being administered.
Sedat, it's time we conclude our business.
Radev is holding up a napkin, $250,000 written on it. You pay this now, you owe this to me now.
Sit down, my friend.
From the second he puts out that figure on a napkin and holds a napkin out in front of him, which is a physical embodiment of the debt, he's in fear. He's torturing him. Psychological torture, emotional torture. It's a fear of what's going to happen to you because you know and I know that you can't meet this debt.
I don't owe you any money, Nick.
He makes nothing of his victims. They're there to take. It's all up for grabs. They do not perceive these people as victims at all.
Violence is about communication. Violence is about making sure that people know that you will use whatever violence is necessary to meet your own particular ends. And everyone has a threshold of tolerable violence or tolerable torture. What Radev does is to work out where your line of threshold of pain is and then go past it.
I think he needs another bath.
Sedat basically is trying to think his way out of this situation. He's got to get out of this hotel room alive. He makes an arrangement to pay Radev a down payment of $20,000. They arranged for Sedat to complete a fax with his bank account details.
Sign it, and I get the hotel to do the exchange.
$230,000 in 1 week or big trouble.
The violence is escalating very quickly, so there's not even any foreplay to the violence. It starts where it means to end, and the hanging from a building is saying to Salan, I am very willing to kill you.
1 week, little man, understand?
Salan had survived an horrific ordeal. In fear of his life, the first thing he did was buy a gun. When Radev arrived to collect his money, Salan opened fire. But despite shooting from point-blank range, he missed. Radev turned and fled.
There's no way Sadat could have raised the money. He couldn't have even unsold a debt to another gangster and raised the money that way. So he does what most desperate people do. He reaches for the same kind of instruments of torture, instruments of control that Radev uses, and even Radev understands what a gun is.
Salan's desperate gesture had bought him time, but also meant the police got involved. Despite assurances that he and his family would be safe, Salan was so terrified he set about defrauding the Commonwealth of $2.5 million and fled to Turkey, refusing to set foot on Australian soil again until Radev was dead. Radev was born in Bulgaria in 1959. Part of the Soviet Union, the Bulgarian population was tightly controlled by the country's feared secret police. In this environment, his criminal career started young. By 10, he was mugging Western tourists, and in his 20s, he had the first of many convictions for violent crime. Radev was powerfully built and took up wrestling, the country's national sport. It was perfect training for a man who enjoyed power and control.
Nick arrives in this country with some history of being in a Soviet-style prison.
He had been used by criminal elements in Bulgaria as a standover man.
It was a fairly well-known tactic of the Russian crime gangs to use wrestlers, boxers, weightlifters as heavies. So he would have been encouraged in his former life to have been pretty out there with violence anyway.
By the end of the 70s, Radev had done time in both Bulgarian and Turkish prisons. Prisoners suffered degrading treatment, chronic overcrowding and frequent violence, and these conditions only the toughest survive. In 1980, Radev managed to flee Bulgaria and settle in Melbourne. From now on, he would be Australia's problem.
Immigration, we know, were not aware of his criminal convictions, so presumably there was some corruption that was able to clear his record.
I have no doubt that from his tattoos, some of which I believe were prison tattoos, Bulgarian prison tattoos, that he obviously had prior convictions, and he played the system and he won.
He would have come to Australia and seen the Australian system and culture as being quite soft, and I think he would have seen it as quite a good area to kind of rape and pillage and plunder and exploit.
I think Nick would have seen Australia as a giant lolly shop. You know, that he had the ability to basically create whatever kind of fantasy world that he wanted.
With such rich pickings to hand, Radev's first move was to cover his back by stealing the identity of his Eastern European neighbour, Ivan Solokov.
Yes. Nick, you have a minute? What do you want? You want drink? You want food? I have nothing. No, Nick, listen. I am the good neighbor. I keep quiet. I keep the building tidy and clean. I don't want to cause no trouble. What, do you want to move something? Go away. No, I don't need help with nothing. Then what do you want? Nick, I have letter here from video shop. Congratulations. They say I have video of Scarface overdue 2 months. They want $40 from me. You want $40? I have nothing. Nick, I don't even have video recorder. I lend you my driver's license so you can join library, remember? No. Yes, I help you as friend. You use my license to join video shop. You borrow in my name. No, give me letter. Look, it says you borrowed Scarface, not me. You. No, you steal my name. Now you steal video. You give me Scarface, you give me $40. I steal your name? Yes, look. Driver's license, Solokov. Bank card, Solokov. This TV, Solokov. The wide Solokov. No! You stop now! I am Ivan Solokov.
Ivan Solikov was a hard-working, honest immigrant, worked in a car factory, and one day he just never turned up for work. His bank accounts remained untouched. No one knew where he went. He just basically disappeared off the face of the earth.
Radev was able to acquire his identity and was able to perform a series of crimes in Solikov's name.
Therefore giving him some sort of protection under an assumed identity until he could actually gain citizenship under his own name. I mean, that is cold.
Radev would appear in court, the record would develop against Solikov's name, not his own, and keeping Radev's criminal convictions, criminal past, criminal history essentially clean.
Establishing his signature modus operandi, Radev invaded Ivan Solikov's life. Forensic psychologist and former police officer Stephen Barron believes Radev would have selected his victim carefully.
He'd picked someone who was physically similar to himself, and he put as much time into this person's relationship with him to learn the essential details of his life. Where he was born, parents' names. So if he took on or assumed the role of this person, the identity of this person, he could demonstrate sufficient knowledge to any inquirer.
No! You stop now!
I am Ivan Solikov.
Radev used Solikov's identity as insurance against deportation. The gruesome murder only came to light many years later when Senior Detective Ben Archbold started taking a closer look at Radev's activities. Police had Ivan Solikov's fingerprints on file, but after he disappeared, Solikov's fingerprints were replaced by Radev's.
When we were tasked with working on Radev, so to speak, we went to the Fingerprint Bureau and the Antecedent Bureau to be able to gather up all the intelligence we had on this person. It was interesting because under the name of Ivan Solikov was Nikolai Radev's fingerprints.
Archbold now had clear proof that Nick Radev had been using two identities.
Nikolai Radev was using the name Ivan Solikov, so the prior convictions were not actually being attributed to his criminal antecedents. So he was able to remain in Australia, commit crimes, get arrested, get charged, get convicted at court, but accrue no criminal records under his own identity. We're able to ascertain through inquiries at GMH Australia that Ivan Solikov stopped turning up to work one day. His body's never been found.
As well as stealing Solikov's identity, Radev also began calling himself Nick the Russian.
Nick Radev was of Bulgarian descent, but he felt that the tag the Russian carried more weight, more fearsome weight.
There is a great deal of fear in hitchhiking or piggybacking the stereotype of being a Russian mafia, because that brings with it this package and baggage of senseless violence and brutality, which seems to cross over borders of sophistication and culture and good manners.
Melbourne underworld figure Mark Chopper Reed was unimpressed by Radev pretending to be a Russian.
He traded on the fact, Nick the Russian, who wasn't Russian, who was a Bulgarian, who came, brought all these Eastern European so-called Russians to Australia and then took them to Serbian nightclubs, which would tell a casual observer that they're not bloody Russians at all. You wouldn't take a Russian to a Serbian nightclub. He'd pistol whip you for a start and shoot you for the insult of taking him to a Serbian nightclub. You wouldn't take a Russian to a Serbian nightclub.
Radev played on the image of the Russian gangster, quickly adopting their ultra-violent methods.
Radev brought, I think, also a sort of Russian mafia sensibility. You wouldn't just go after one person, you go after their whole family. I think even within the standover man trade, there are rules and standards. Women, children, old people, leave them out.
Forensic psychologist Dr. Chris Lennings believes Radev's repressed childhood would have had a lasting impact.
There's still some argument about to what extent does the environment cause genuine psychopathy. I think, however, if you come out of a really bad environment and you're a psychopath, then you are going to be excessive in your violence because it's going to give absolute licence to all that nastiness that you've got inside. One of the cardinal things about being a psychopath is you absolutely feel no emotion, no remorse for what you do.
By the mid-80s, Radev was in a strong position. He'd murdered his neighbour and stolen his identity for cover, and his drug dealing and extortion rackets were making him incredibly rich. His ultra-violent reputation also meant that he was becoming a feared player in Melbourne's underworld. Radev cultivated this image as a gangster, adopting the dress and mannerisms of his screen hero, drug-dealing psychopath Tony Montana from the film Scarface.
He wore the expensive suits, he smoked the most expensive cigars, he loved his expensive cognac. He wore the white suits a la Tony Montana.
He was a flashy dresser. He had the cars to go with it. He had the fellas running around with him, immaculately dressed. And a lot of people in that field look up to those blokes because they're getting around like scumbags themselves.
And he actually had his bedroom room adorned with these posters. He actually believed he dressed like the men, tried to talk like the men, and they actually believe they're gangsters. They're gangsters in their own right.
I mean, a normal person watches those films and might be a bit shocked by the violence, but it's entertainment for them. It's not a lesson in life. God knows what goes through the minds of people who think there's a bloke who gets machine gunned to pieces in a car on a bridge. I want to be like that.
So Nick's ego was very, very big, and he fed it with this identity that he wanted to own, which was he was the man, he was the godfather. And he wanted to be that warlord that was beyond the law.
Forensic psychologists believe the violent movie stars Radev idolised reinforced his sense of himself as a gangster.
One assumes he's grown up without much in the way of any real sense of identity. He finds a figure that meets those identity needs, that appears to be romantic, that appears to make sense out of his life, that gives him in some ways a rationale for the way he lives his life.
He had to find somebody, so he found someone who was quite happy to engage in violence as a model, someone who probably handled differences and conflict with ultra-violence, and someone likewise who was willing to die in a hail of bullets.
In some ways, people like Radev were living at the movie. They're living out what the movie offered them to be because they had nothing else to fill the void.
In the style of his celluloid heroes, Radev was also racking up a bit of a reputation as a lady killer.
People say he was a very charming man. It's a real paradox, this contrast between this very charming, urbane almost, European man and this cold psychopath killer on the other hand. And he was always popular with women.
Nick had the ability to charm, and he was also very, very calculating and obviously very clever.
He was another crook who was really sucked in by this whole film culture. He was truly living that life where he felt that first comes the money, then comes the power, then comes the woman.
Influenced by the gangster imagery he internalised, Radev had power, drugs and money. All he needed to complete the picture was the ultimate accessory every gangster eventually needed, a compliant woman he could persuade to marry.
Excuse me, miss.
Yes. Oh, hello.
Hi. I'm not sure if you remember me, but you cut my hair 2 weeks ago.
Yes, I remember. How are you?
Good. I'm very good. Now I'm better that I've seen you.
How can I help you?
Excuse me, madam. I'm in need of a haircut, very urgently. I wonder if it's okay if I took your spot.
I'm sorry?
I need a haircut. It won't take long. I'm sure you can find some way to fill in the next 20 minutes, eh?
Right. I'm just going to pop outside for a smoke, Sylvia.
Sorry about that. Sylvia, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, Sylvia. I need a haircut. I have an important date at the races this Saturday.
Oh, where are they on?
In Randwick, in Sydney. I have tickets to Vice Regal room, lunch, champagne. I fly a business class. Stay at the Intercontinental Hotel in a suite.
Well, that is a special date. Who are you going with?
That's why I need a haircut. I have to look my best. There's a woman I really like. She's funny and smart and very beautiful.
Lucky you.
Lucky me? No. Lucky you.
Well, Sylvia Radev was a hairdresser. She was a clean skin, no criminal background. Nick just lavished her with presents. And it was almost as if she was coerced into the relationship by just the sheer weight of gifts.
She said that he pursued her with some enthusiasm and wore her down. It may well be that he wanted to build a sense of belonging, a sense of status, a sense of ties to the country, so he couldn't be sent back. She believed that he married her because of her, his ability to become an Australian citizen. That's probably true.
He was a very forceful man, and in this relationship, he just would not take no for an answer.
So the need to attach is inherent in all humans, and so that part of him wants to have some kind of human bonding. He was very charming. Most of these criminals have a certain charm, and also he wanted the conquest. So all of those things together would have made him really pursue her until he had her.
Radev had successfully infiltrated Sylvia's life. They were married within 3 months, and Radev played the loving husband, but it was an act that didn't last long.
He subjected her to years of torture and abuse. She was terrified that if she left him, she would be murdered, and other people around her would be murdered. So she was in a terrifying ordeal for years, while he continued his crime spree. Just an awful situation for her, but one she couldn't escape from.
From my knowledge of it, it was a relationship of convenience.
No, mate, you can't date her. She's half your fucking age.
Should love my experience. I'll show her what a man is for.
I mean, it's not like she has money.
She has Aussie passport. If I marry her, they can't send me back to Bulgaria.
I seemed to hit a raw nerve when I spoke to him about his citizenship, and he had this big fear of having that taken from him and being returned to his homeland. I'm aware they had a child out of it. I'm aware that she was a very unhappy girl, that she was tormented for years by her father, and as was the mother as far as I am concerned.
They'd be no more than possessions to him. They wouldn't be people.
There's even rumour that he used to hide his firearms in the crib of his daughter. I mean, this man just had no boundaries.
Their resources, their assets, they allow him to create a legal argument to any kind of deportation. They provide for him some semblance of connection to the country.
In the world that he lived in, which was, so violent and full of horror and coercion, probably just to have a woman and a child and some little cocoon that he could go to was his way of feeling normal.
Marrying Sylvia secured Radev's position in Australia and meant he was safe from deportation. Although he served several jail terms, Radev managed to escape serious police attention for over a decade, as many of his victims would never call the police.
Nick Radev was a man who preyed on other criminals. He could be as violent as he liked, extort money from them, and because these people were not going to go to the police.
He was a straightforward, standover man, extortionist, a man who was willing to kill, had a reputation for being willing to kill, and so the threat of his violence was very powerful.
In 1998, Radev finally found himself in the police spotlight. On the 16th of August, 2 policemen were shot dead near Radev's home. As a violent offender with a known hatred of police, he was an obvious suspect.
I was at the organised crime squad, and we were tasked with a proactive investigation to shut him down. So he was predominantly running around committing blackmail, drug dealing, and always carried a firearm.
Archbold couldn't link Radev to the murders, but kept him under investigation. By 2001, when Solan fired his gun at Radev, Archbold was ready to make his move.
We were monitoring phones and taking calls from Nikolai Radev, between Nikolai Radev and Mr. Solan, and we were endeavouring to bring Nikolai Radev into our net. He was wanted. He was wanted for blackmail. He was wanted for many other things, but we just couldn't find him. He was elusive. He was staying from hotel to hotel, and we were trying to juggle him on the telephone to get him to a certain place.
Police finally tricked Radev into going to an address where they'd be waiting. Radev arrived armed and in his haste went to the wrong house, where a woman answered the door.
He had a firearm in his hand at the time, and he turned around to face members of the Special Operations Group who had a big spotlight in his eyes. As I understand it, the firearm was pointing at the police, and in Victoria, if you point a firearm at the police, you normally come off second best. However, they were professional enough to be able to ascertain that there was a lady that had opened the door he had knocked on and that she would have been in the direct line of fire. And they were able to then go in, have him de-armed, brought down, and everyone was safe. They did a fantastic job.
Backed into a corner, Radev fought like a wild animal.
He was very violent during the arrest. He had to be actually physically restrained. He was put in handcuffs and a bag was put over his head. And it was at that stage he was handed over to investigators and brought back to Scarface police station.
It was there that Ben Archbold came face to face for the first time with the man he was determined to bring to justice.
Nick, can you take a seat in your chair, please?
I am sit down, mate.
Sit.
You fucking low life.
Right, this interview is being conducted at the Tactical Response Squad office on this Sunday, the 2nd of June 2001. Persons present.
Fucking low
Senior
life.
Detective Paul O'Brien.
Fuck you!
Just settle down, Radev. Nick, I intend to interview you in regards to the offence of blackmail.
I blackmail nobody, mate.
Sure, but before continuing, I need to inform you...
I am bleeding everywhere.
...that you're under no obligation to say or do anything.
You piece of shit. Take my handcuffs, I am bleeding.
Now the handcuffs stay on.
Why on I am bleeding?
Because you are violent.
But anything you do say or do can be given in evidence.
You big shot? Ha! You going to kill me? You going to kill me, you cock? Are you going to kill me? Are you going to kill me?
Do you understand your rights?
Fuck your right!
Don't spit.
Fuck you, spit! Fuck, spit!
All right, we're going to suspend the interview.
Why don't you pipe down and behave yourself?
You fucking pipe copper.
We know about Solikov, Nick.
What?
We know you killed Solikov.
He gave the police a terrible time. One of them spat blood in his face. He carried on yelling and screaming how he was tougher than what they were. They were only dogs, and he tried to demean them with his general behaviour. It went off like a firecracker.
He was frothing at the mouth, and I still remember him just spurting blood out of his mouth where he'd obviously had a mouth wound, which he ascertained at some stage during the arrest and during his behaviour.
Fuck your right!
Don't spit.
Fuck, spit!
He's just an animal, carrying on like a banshee, some would say.
The critical moment in the interview came when Ben Archbold confronted Radev about the murder of Ivan Solikov.
When Detective Ben Archbold raised the Solikov matter with him, insinuating directly to Radev that Radev had murdered Solikov in order to acquire his identity, Nick Radev went, as they say, the colour of bad shit.
We know about Solikov, Nick.
What?
We know you killed Solikov.
I put to him that he murdered Ivan Solikov, a person that he used to be a neighbour of, a person who never turned up to work and a person who had no criminal convictions, and he went pale, and our conversation finished then. I have no doubt that he was aware that I was onto him.
Despite Archbold's best efforts, Radev was back on the streets within weeks, worried that a murder charge would land him a stiff sentence or lead to his deportation. Radev resorted to drastic action. The young policeman was about to become another of the Invader's victims.
He could hold a grudge, Nick Radev, there's no doubt about that. You know, and he didn't mind the possibility of being killed in the execution of that grudge. And certainly Ben Archbold got under his skin.
His natural reaction was to lash out, and so he basically started a vendetta against the detective Ben Archbold.
Psychopaths are very self-centred, they're very much about number one, but if they perceive a wound, and I don't mean a physical wound, but a psychological wound, a wound to their pride, they feel that that person who is responsible for it has to be eradicated.
Radev then decided to take matters into his own hands and try and scare him off by threatening to kill him. He put the feelers out to find out where Ben Archbold lived.
We believe a corrupt member of the Victorian Police Force sold Ben Archbold's home address for $30,000 to Nick Radev.
In his classic style, Radev the Invader started closing in on the young detective, investigating him. With death threats hanging over his head and his home address in Radev's hands, Archbold was forced into hiding, allowing the Invader to continue what he did best.
He was looking for me and he wanted to kill me. There was no doubt about that. I had been moving my address from hotel to hotel, been carrying my firearm 24 hours a day, and it had really disturbed my life.
Radev has gone completely berserk. The hatred for this policeman that interviewed him, and whom he had tried to humiliate in the interview room, he became obsessed with revenge.
He spoke to me and his mother and said that he'd been dealing with this Nick bloke who's a real nasty piece of work, and things had turned for the worse, and this Nick had a number on him to get him, and his life was in danger.
The threats came to a very, very extreme level when he entered my parents' hotel in Turak.
You know, when someone serves you, they say thanks, or that. He was pretty arrogant. You know, his voice strengthened a few times, but at the time I didn't know who he was. And he just said, "Oh, you wouldn't be Ben's father?" And I said, "No, Ben who?"
Peter's quick thinking had saved his life, as phone taps later revealed some alarming news.
The suggestion is, from a listening device, that he was in possession of a hand grenade at the time. He asked my father whether I was there, and my father denied knowing me, a thing that caused problems with my father for a couple of weeks, because I said, "How can you even deny who your son is?" And he said, "Well, I would assume that you would do the same thing in the circumstances. The fucking lunatic had a hand grenade."
Coming to the family hotel there with a hand grenade, it's a fairly unambiguous statement, you know. I might take everyone out here, doesn't matter, but I'll get Ben Archbold. So, you know, Ben had to go into hiding. His family sold the hotel. They had to move away. It really shattered their lives forever, and I think there's a trail of families that Nick Radev touched in similar ways.
Former policeman Brian Murphy can't understand why Radev was allowed back on the streets.
Radev, as a result of that, went on for a further 3 or 4 years because of his reputation. Everybody knew about it, and it made him bigger in the eyes of the scumbags that he was running around with. As far as the policeman that sold him the address, I'm afraid I would have had to kneecap him. And I mean that sincerely.
Radev the Invader had struck again, and Ben Archbold's entire family were forced into hiding. Radev was seemingly untouchable. He'd murdered, blackmailed and extorted without repercussion. Now he'd taken out the only cop brave enough to take him on.
The more times you get away with something, the bolder you may become. And, you know, Radev did have a reputation amongst the community for being extremely violent.
This guy's ego basically pushes him beyond reality, and he thinks he can get away with anything, and he also thinks that, you know, his power is limitless.
As the 21st century dawned, Melbourne's party scene was exploding, and its streets were awash with drugs and dollars. For an old hand like Radev, the young and inexperienced dealers were easy prey.
So, really, it's too easy to make good cash with gear of this quality.
All right, with respect, Nick, let's just do this first deal for the party, and if that goes all right, then we'll consider doing further business.
Sure, sure. You are a very astute businessman. Now, Lachlan, what you're looking for here is a great amount of cocaine. Are you sure you have the money to cover this?
Look, you let me worry about the money, okay? 25 grand is nothing. You just worry about getting me quality gear.
Good answer, my friend.
Hey, man, good to see you. Where you been? I said 7.
I got delayed. Hey, let's go somewhere quiet, sort this out.
Yeah, let's go upstairs. Angus, come.
Where is money?
Right here, my friend. Gear in the briefcase?
That's right, the gear.
You, rich boy, take off your pants.
Hey, come on. Never got time for this.
Take them off, mobster!
Nick, come on. We'll get a better fuck than him in town. Hey, come on.
Nick was a bloke who believed a lot of drug dealers owed him money. There were a lot of disputed accounts going on. I think he invented some of them.
He would set up a drug deal and assume or let that person believe that he had drugs to sell. The person would rock up with a whole heap of money. He would just take the money, do the rip and get rid of him. I mean, as if that person is going to go to the police and report the fact they were there trying to buy $500,000 worth of drugs. It just doesn't happen.
So he just understands that the exercise of excessive violence in a hurry is going to achieve your ends pretty successfully. You overwhelm them so rapidly, you cause them to go into almost a meltdown state where they can't think. And if you rush them in that way, you're more likely to be successful in getting what you want.
Take them off, mobster!
While Radev was helping himself to other people's money, a new player was emerging on Melbourne's drug scene.
Carl Williams, he was just a fat, wobbly-bottom boy from bloody Broadmeadows, you know.
Carl was a fat fool, and I won't ever revise that opinion of him.
See, Jason Moran put this idiot in charge of his own ecstasy chemicals and pill press, right? He's taught this complete wombat how to do this, right?
And he fell into a little bit more responsibility, moving drugs for Jason and Mark or whoever.
Carl by now was well established in the manufacture of amphetamines. He had good connections. He was a very good businessman in this area, if you like. People trusted him, and therefore he was doing business with a range of people.
Never one to pass up a quick buck, Radev realised there was easy money to be made working with Carl.
Carl Williams and Nick Radev had a relationship, but it was it was a very awkward one. Williams was fearful of Radev.
Radev was a quarrelsome, difficult person to deal with in this business, but he was taking lots of product. So Carl, in his, I guess, greed and naivety, kept doing business with him.
By 2003, Nick Radev was living the life of a Hollywood gangster. He wore expensive suits, smoked cigars and consumed copious amounts of cocaine. And the police had failed to shut him down. He was loosely aligned with Carl Williams, one of Melbourne's biggest drug lords, and business was booming. And even better, the city's gangland wars were slowly but surely killing off the competition.
Radev by now had found himself right at the centre of speed and amphetamine operations here in Melbourne.
As Williams' empire expanded, Radev endeavoured to expand his own empire, but he just did not have the ability. He could stand over and he would kill people, but he just couldn't kill enough people to be able to take over the Williams empire.
There was an increasing level of tension in their relationship. Radev was continually complaining about the quality of speed that was coming out of Carl. He wanted to meet the cook to have this out and discuss the recipe. And, he wouldn't have known, two things about how to make a batch of speed, but this was the underlying plan, that he planned to rip everything off.
Radev had seen off many enemies over the years, but made a fatal mistake taking on Carl Williams. On April the 15th, 2003, Radev and Williams met at a Melbourne cafe to talk business.
Why couldn't you do it?
Roberta's got a night out planned. I got to look after Dakota.
You're pussy whipped, eh?
Mate, I'd love to do it. It's an easy 80 grand.
What's the mark like?
Another lily-asked private school boy wants to make some quick money selling pills.
Security?
Nothing. It's a house in Coburg. He lives by himself. You walk in, throw some knuckle around, you pick up the cash, you leave. It's too easy. Any minute now.
Where you learn to park? Fucking blind school? I throw all the punches. You just make sure we don't get any surprises, okay? Fucking forgot my cigars.
Clean as a whistle.
Nick Radev had a long and violent criminal past. He lived by the sword, and last night he died by the sword. As he approached his black Mercedes in Queen Street, Coburg, a gunman fired at least 7 shots. He died instantly. 2 friends ran off, one escaping in a taxi.
When these fellas go along over a period of time, they build up the aura that nothing is ever going to kill them. Nothing will happen to them. They're bulletproof. Well, I think that's what happened to him on that day.
He was most certainly lured to his death, no question. The killers roared up in their car, emptied 2 guns. So, you know, it just goes to show again, smoking is bad for you. Leave the cigar in the car, would have walked away.
Radev had become another victim of Melbourne's gang wars. The police and several other sources all believe he was killed on the orders of Carl Williams, a man he trusted as a friend. In the style of his Hollywood idols, Radev died in a hail of bullets, gunned down in the street. His wife Sylvia was freed from her nightmare. Sadat Salan returned to face the music, and Ben Archbold and his family were finally able to come out of hiding.
What did you think when you heard that Nick Radev had been shot dead?
I think the wife opened a bottle of champagne.
When I received a phone call from someone who said that I would be happy to hear that Nikolai Radev was dead, I was happy to hear that, and I exchanged pleasantries with the person who rang me that he said he looked like a piece of Swiss cheese.
The folk I've met like him don't really believe they're going to die. You know, they believe that they're going to somehow or other always be the one on top.
I think that he basically really believed in his own immortality, that fantasy world that he lived in where he was the boss of the world, that he was invincible and he didn't think people would turn on him.
It's rumoured that a number of organisations had contracts out on him. It simply means that Williams and others got there first. But if you look at how he died, it was done in such a way that his own ostentatious lifestyle was held out to ridicule. He had no idea it was coming, none.
In one last flourish, Radev made sure he took his riches to the grave, being buried in a $50,000 gold coffin.
I covered Nick Radev's funeral for a newspaper story, and the key to covering gangland funerals were to blend in, because normally there'd be a massive crowd of mourners there. Nick Radev's funeral was very difficult to cover because there were only about 30 people there. Nick Radev had made so many enemies throughout his criminal career. He had no one at his funeral. He died a very, very lonely man in a gold-plated coffin.
Nick Radev, the refugee turned invader, died as he had lived in an orgy of violence. He was a callous predator without fear or remorse, and he spent his life inspiring terror. But in death, the only emotion aroused was relief that the nightmare was finally over.